he's got two things that make him a reasonable potential heavyweight contender. He hits really hard, and he has, at the very least, 1.125 rounds of cardio.
Yay. I wish it would be amazing if they had just honest Ron Perlman style voiceovers at the beginning of Fight Night cards like this.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
He's a man with one win in the UFC. We don't know much about him, but he can swing. And he's a big guy, and you idiots eat that slop up.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
finishes
facing him, one of the most fearsome hitters in the division, when he decides to throw, which isn't very often. Yarsenio Rosenstrike, receiver of one of the stupidest KOs in UFC history. A man who will do absolutely nothing if you give him the opportunity.
His fights almost always end in the first round, and thank God for that.
Because when they go long, it's pain for everyone involved. Mainly the viewer.
Coming up, a main event so uninteresting, even the Sauds didn't want it. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie.
Hello.
Hello, Phil. You may be able to tell, dear listener, from my voice that I am slightly under the weather, but I didn't even do my usual bit of doing like a big fake cough to start the show, because I don't feel that bad. I didn't feel that bad, anyway, until I looked at the main event for next week's Fight Night card.
Oh, you do sound like you're struggling a bit there.
I looked at it and I started to feel...
He's back. He's back again. Iggy Boy has returned for his inexplicable sixth UFC main event.
Yarsenio Rosenstrike in his sixth main event booking. A booking which hilariously was regarded by the Saudi Arabian dignitaries who were offered this event as a grave insult. This was a card which was supposed to be a travel card. And, say what you will about those Sauds. They know an Apex card when they see one. And they said, "No, sir, Mr. White, you will take this to your warehouse, and let's never speak of this again. Come back when you have a real main event to offer me."
Take it back to where it belongs. Like, are you sure? We have Tyson Pedro in the co-main. He's also large. Yeah, tremendous. I love the idea that, that they'd, for once, someone just looked at what the UFC was offering, was like, what is this piddling shit? Get this out of my face.
Yeah, it took a literal, dynastic monarchy to have the Stones to tell the UFC to fuck off with their terrible heavyweight main event. Now, I gotta be fair. Of course, when I first looked at this upcoming card, which we're not gonna start off the show talking about, by the way, we're gonna talk about the Brandon Bowl, as Sriram Muralidharam has called it. We're gonna talk about Brandon Royval versus Brandon Moreno too, to begin, but I just want to say that in fairness to the UFC, I had the initial reaction that any person who suffered through as many Apex cards as you and I have, Phil, would have, which is there's a flyweight fight right there, which is clearly of great divisional relevance, will very likely set somebody up, one of the fighters in particular, for title contention in the very near future. Why is Alex Perez versus Muhammad Mukayev not the main event? And I was going to go through the whole thing and be like, oh my God, they just picked the fattest dudes on the card yet again. And then, of course, many people have made the point that you shouldn't book Alex Perez in a main event fight because
No.
you can't trust him. The man has had like 13 fight cancellations in the last 3 or 4 years. And I said, yeah, fair enough, actually. I probably would not want to hang an entire card on Alex Perez's chances of making it to fight night whole and healthy. I still wouldn't have gone with the heavyweights, just speaking for myself.
There had to be someone better out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to talk about a guy who I hate to watch versus a guy I have no reason to know anything about, then I would have much rather you put Umar Nurmagomedov versus Beksat Almakhan in the main event. Because at least I know one of those guys. I'm actually pretty impressed and entertained by him. And then I would look at the footage of his opponent and be like, hey, you know what? This guy's pretty good. I can't be that mad about not knowing who he is yet because all I got to do is watch a minute and I'm like, okay, this dude's got talent. You could still do better than Rosenstrike Gaziv, but
you can basically always do better than Rosenstrike.
Pretty much. Yeah. But hey, 6th main event. He's going for that Anthony Smith record. I guess I can't deny him that honor. So let's leave that for later in the show, and for the moment, turn our gaze backwards to last week's Mexico City card, a card which proves that even heavyweights, or that not only heavyweights are capable of gassing and looking strangely bad when the bout is contested 8,000 feet above sea level. Mm-hmm. And the main event, the Brandon Bowl, Brandon Moreno versus Brandon Royval 2, a perfectly weird capstone to a very strange card.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad card.
No.
But it was odd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because I was thinking about this before these fights came along, and I was like, you know what? MMA is a weird sport because it's so high variance, and yet, it should be so many things can go wrong. So much should be dependent on just how people show up on the day, right? And yet, people will often be, relatively confident about how rematches will go, and honestly, they're often right to be.
It's the only place where you can feel that degree of confidence in MMA, right? You're like, well, I have literally seen this before, so I have something concrete to go on.
But in other sports, teams and individuals will face each other tons and tons of times, and, lots of times the other person will win.
Yeah, 50-50.
But in MMA and to a lesser extent boxing, and to a much, much lesser extent things like Muay Thai, you get you're basically basing your ideas of who will win over a fight from like a sample size of who maybe at the most like 3 and an absolutely crazy outlier level 4 fights between 2 people.
Yeah.
I was thinking, like variance just doesn't seem to rear its head very much, which is, and I was thinking this as I was thinking, and these fights are pointless. They're just going to go the same way they did last time. We saw who was going to win these fights, and I don't really know why we're watching them. And I should have listened to my own kind of thoughts about this stuff, which is that MMA is a really, is a sport with a lot of chaos.
Yep.
Available to it, and never more so than when, like, Brandon Moreno, the most unpredictable man in MMA, is stepping into the cage. Yeah.
Brandon Moreno really is like the perfect figurehead for elite MMA because, man, when he's on, you watch him and you're like, this dude is incredible. He's like insanely tough and holy shit, like he's got this great well-rounded game. I've seen him win fights with his wrestling, with his submission grappling. I've seen him dominate people with his hands. And of course, because he's Brandon Moreno, I've also seen him look like absolute shit which, counter to everything you might think about rematches being the only kind of fight which you can actually predict with a truly reasonable amount of certainty. He absolutely dominated Brandon Royval in their first fight, beat him easily. And then this time he looked like shit. So, hey, thank goodness for Brandon Moreno reminding us and making us really ultimately a salve for people like you and I, Phil, who at least part of our job regarding MMA is to make predictions. Mm-hmm. You can watch these two fights and like instantly I feel like we're slightly off the hook. Like who watching that first fight would have ever guessed this would be the approach Brandon Moreno would take in the rematch? We couldn't have guessed that. So give us a goddamn break. Of course we're wrong all the time. Look at this. Doesn't make any sense. It's not my fault. So anyway,
yep.
Yeah, let's talk about the actual performance here. First thing I will say is that I think we all agree, even the most novice and uneducated of fans will agree that Brandon Moreno's approach was pretty dumb. That he threw probably about 80% of the punches he threw, if not more, were like just repulsive to the eyes. Like you're like, that's not how you throw a good punch. And having said that, I was still pretty sure he won. Because, and I think it's entirely, you could blame him for losing it. I'm not upset about it because he looked terrible. But I was still pretty sure he won 3 of the rounds, 1, 2, and 5. And, I say that because when he did land, he landed with obvious authority and power. Whereas Brandon Royval, I believe, I've not been able to verify this, but I believe he set the UFC record for most strikes missed in a single fight. His, this comes alongside a record set for second most strikes thrown in a UFC fight. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Falling short of Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar by a staggering like 200 plus punches, because that's just how many shots Max Holloway threw on that night. Even so, Royval threw, 500 plus, a very high number for a 5-rounder, and he missed 365 times, connecting at a rate of just 28%, despite throwing like 3 times as many punches as Brandon Moreno. A staggering degree of inaccuracy from Brandon Royval. And, I just don't think, I think it was very easy to get the impression that he was doing so much more work in a lot of these rounds. And then you combine that with how sloppy Brandon Moreno looked. I get why Moreno did not cinch the decision, but frankly, Brandon Royval was impressively inaccurate in this fight.
Yeah, this is... I mean, I've been trying to think of what the best parallel for a fight that looks like this is in UFC or MMA like history. Because so much of the time when we're talking about like judging quality of shots and so on, we're talking about, there's a kind of Diego Sanchez versus Ross Pearson kind of thing going on where one guy is just, sort of overwhelming what the judges can see because he's just drawing their eyes onto him with his, this fearlessness and his ability to just charge forward, but all they're seeing is like any minor success that he has.
Yeah.
And they don't feel like anything that's landing. And this happens, all the time. You get a whole bunch of bad decisions from that perspective. But this is like the absolute like bizarro version of that, where one guy is throwing the ugliest heaters imaginable, just falling over as he like throws JDS windmill overhands
with both hands, mind
his
you.
Opponent.
Even his left hook was a rainbow overhand.
Yeah, just
Arguably his best punch, by the way. We know Brandon Moreno has a great left hook. What happened? I can't. He was out there. Brandon Royval was like 2 inches taller than him, but he was throwing like Minowa Man versus Hongman Choi punches. Like, what the fuck was he thinking? Why did he do that?
Yeah. So this was a fight where one guy was periodically landing the ugliest punches of all time.
Yeah.
And the other guy was throwing technical-looking, crisp, clean-looking strikes directly into thin air and or Brandon Moreno's guard. Yep.
For the first part of the fight, it was so much of that volume was just like feeler jabs that weren't even close. And then as the fight went on and the distance closed a bit, Royval was instead throwing lots and lots of feeler punches, which were just being easily caught on the gloves and forearms of Moreno.
Yeah, I just can't think of a time when I've seen that dynamic in play.
I think probably the best, and this is a far better fight with much bigger swings, but a reasonable comparison is maybe Robbie Lawler, Carlos Condit. This is a fight where
Carlos Condit just kind of wins that fight.
Yeah, but he did land 176 out of 495.
Yeah, he didn't miss a ton as well.
35% is better than 28, but it's still a very low connect percentage compared to the total. Whereas Lawler landed 51% of 177, many of which were big, stupid, overthrown overhands.
Yep.
So that's like the same kind of fight, but man, the momentum swings were so much more defined, and Condit's success was so much more evident, and Robbie Lawler didn't look nearly so inexplicably sloppy as Brandon Moreno did.
Yeah, Robbie Lawler was fighting what's always been just a really poisonous style matchup for him, which is a fairly mobile person who can kick and throw, who's tall and who can kick and who can throw volume.
Yeah.
Whereas, Brandon Moreno was fighting someone that he'd fought before and had looked good against and was now just looking absolutely atrocious against.
Uh-huh.
I mean, partially because I was thinking, like, has Brandon Moreno ever really... Well, I think it's a combination of basically the fact that he's dreadful if he tries to close the distance and punch at the same time, and much more so, because we kind of saw this dynamic against Cara France as well, but also much more so if he's fighting a southpaw and he doesn't have his jab, because like everyone in MMA pretty much, it seems, he just chucked it in the bin for this fight.
Yeah, that was a chilling realization I had very shortly into the fight, but I'll tell you why it was so chilling. He did use his jab the first time against Brandon Royval. He was better. And by the way, on the 5 distinct occasions when he bothered to throw his jab in this fight, it landed. Like every time he actually tried it, it just landed. But literally, I think you could count the number of jabs he threw on one hand. I'm not even joking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in his much shorter previous fight, granted, he did throw some stupid, hideous overhands that time too. I remember thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, he always does. Like he is like JDS in that way.
Yeah, his right hand is
is generally dreadful.
His right hand is not his best punch, but it works and in fact improves in form when he pairs it with the jab.
Yes.
And it's just the weird thing that he just completely forgot to throw his jab in this fight. Some people were pointing out that he, I guess this was maybe his first fight with Saif Saud in his corner.
Mm-hmm.
That he's been sort of floating around since the James Krause debacle. But, I gotta say, it just fits into a pattern, a really bizarre pattern of Brandon Moreno just being the most inconsistent elite fighter in the entire UFC.
Yep.
Cause this is, we talked about the fundamental predictability of rematches, how they're just a godsend for people who have to pick fights. And And Brandon Moreno, who has had more rematches than anyone, has just routinely flown in the face of that sort of idea, because he's rematched, like, 3 different fighters on approximately 402 different occasions. And I swear to God, he's not looked like the same fighter twice.
Mm-hmm.
There's a completely different Brandon Moreno in each of the 4 fights with Davis and Figueiredo. Arguably the best looking one is the one that he lost or got the draw, which he probably should have lost in their first fight. And yeah, he just looked completely different from the guy who fought Brandon Royval last time. He didn't even think of going for his wrestling until much later in the bout, even though that seems like an obvious move, because A, it's what won him their first fight. B, we just saw Brandon Royval lose to Alexandre Pantoja primarily because he couldn't stop the takedowns.
Well, so I think a big part of this and why Royval missed so many strikes is that his attempt to compensate for being taken down all the time was simply to make sure that he was never offering his hips at any point to Moreno.
This was
he was just standing on the outside and feinting and never stepping forward at any point. And I mean, when he did occasionally, I think Moreno, you saw that Moreno landed some counter takedowns that made me think, oh yeah, he'd genuinely been training this.
Yeah, he expected Royval
the only times when Moreno's game looked coherent, when he was like countering a low kick with a takedown.
Right.
You're like, oh yeah, that's what he planned for. He planned for Royval to come at him and to create, because that's basically what happened in their first fight, is that Royval created collisions, and then in those collisions, like, Moreno would body lock him and take the back or take him down or whatever. He clearly planned to capitalize on those, but Royval was just like, I'm not going to make any of them happen. I'm just going to stand here as far away as possible and jab air.
Yep. This was we were kind of wondering, I suppose, in the back of our minds, what happened to the look that Brandon Royval unveiled against Rogerio Bontorin. That was his leaf blower, capital T technical performance. And it was kind of weird, really, that he did that. It seemed like it was going to be a new overcorrected direction for him after the back-to-back losses to Moreno and Pantoja. And then he kind of went back to just being Brandon Royval for his next 2 opponents, Matt Schnell, Matthews Nicolau. And then he lost to Pantoja again and rediscovered that this is in fact how he would like to avoid. This is his only recourse to avoid a fight where the opponent he just gives them free takedowns. Because the thing with Royval, I think, is that he is it's not that he's like a purely rote fighter, although there is some of that. I think it's that he's one of many MMA fighters who can only ever think of offense or defense exclusively. He can't have both in mind. And so he can be a really fluid, creative, and surprisingly accurate striker when he is just walking into the fire and accepting exchanges, as he was against like Kai Kara-France, where obviously he got decked very quickly in that fight, but in recovering, he was also just like hitting Kara-France in these really long, extended, wild exchanges quite accurately. But that is a particular death knell for him when it comes to a takedown threat, because his inability to react defensively when he is trying to get on an offensive roll just means that anybody who wants to gets free takedowns.
Yep.
And so, yeah, his adjustment to that is to, just not get into range. And just go full leaf blower. But yeah, still, Brandon Moreno.
Like Brandon Moreno.
No ability to adjust.
Yes. I think he comes in with, I think he is actually a game planner. That's the only possible explanation I can come in.
Yeah, for why he looks so radically different.
Is that he game plans and has no ability to divert from it, and also that a lot of the time his game plans are not very good.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, he fought Royval like Royval was like 6 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
Where was like the body work
Yeah.
from the Figueiredo fights?
Good question.
Do body punches not work against southpaws?
Or tall people, as a rule? Is that not
tall people? Yes, exactly. There's a lot of real estate there.
It's one of the most basic ideas when you're fighting somebody who's taller. Like, okay, I get the overhands, but where the fuck were the body shots?
We know that he's quite good at them.
Yeah, and that is an automatic strategic decision against a taller opponent. You hit them in the body. Everybody knows that. I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Had no jab, which, and again, like his, left hook. What happened? Like, he has a really good left hook and he just was incapable the entire fight long of tightening it up. I don't think did he land the left hook at all, except for on a rare occasion when it followed the right hand? Because that goofy overhand right did land quite a few times.
Yeah, he landed many horrible punches, yes.
Yeah, but they landed with, hard. They landed with serious authority. He hurt Royval in like the first 2 rounds. But his left hook looked like it was his first time throwing that punch. Because he threw it in this absurd overhand fashion. It just never came close. I think part of that was that it didn't have the jab to play off of, which it is so often the best setup for Royval's left, or for Moreno's left hook. But even so, like, I would have been much happier if I saw him missing a good left hook than missing a left hook which looked like it was designed to miss. So yeah, I don't know. Just a very, it's like there was like a deal with the devil on this card where they finally stuck a flyweight and a featherweight fight at the top of a fight night card.
Yep.
Which you're basically going to have to do if you're trying to cater to a Mexican audience, because one of the best things about the Mexican as a people is they don't really produce heavyweights. I think that's one of their proudest cultural traditions. No heavyweights. But it's like they finally put a flyweight and a featherweight booking at the top of the card, but in exchange they somehow convinced those guys to fight like light heavyweights and middleweights. This felt like a middleweight fight.
Yep.
And the co-main event, which was more awesome, I gotta say, was really had some drama. It felt like a light heavyweight fight to me.
Yep.
So that's all I gotta say. Moreno should have won. Oh, except to point out that the fact that he didn't win actually comes down to some terrible scorecards. Because I think I can easily understand if you gave Royval the last 3 rounds. Because clearly, at least that was the stage of the fight where all of his ineffective punches were at least like touching Moreno's guard.
Yeah, and there were a couple of times where he landed some genuinely like significant flurries up against.
He staggered Moreno a little bit in round 4, I believe. And Moreno's volume just vanished. Like, particularly in the 5th round, even though I thought he won it because he landed the best shots, he did so little that I couldn't really be upset. But in fact, the scorecards, which got Royval the win, I believe both of the winning Royval cards gave him round 2 and not round 5. Yeah. Which is completely inexplicable because he definitely lost the first 2 rounds, right? Especially the second. That's like the clearest Moreno round of the fight. He hit Royval with like the 3 hardest shots of the entire fight in that round. I don't understand that. He visibly hurt him in the first 45 seconds of the round. So, just a very, very strange flyweight main event. Not the worst fight I've ever seen. I'll take this over a heavyweight main event any goddamn day of the week. But very strange. Did not look like what you expect out of a flyweight 5-rounder. Really didn't.
Yeah. I'm also not overly enthused. Well, like Royval called out Pantoja after this, and
yeah, I definitely want to see that again.
And you know what? Yeah,
that fight kind of sucked.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was fine. I don't need to see it again. But also, I just get the feeling that this is also an indication of, how MMA variants can work.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, especially if you're just, you've got an amazing chin and an incredible motor.
Yeah.
Because, do I really want Royval just to get shots at high level, championship level fighters over and over again until he can just outlast them in one of the times he meets them and get a win of sorts?
Because my God, if he has this approach in a rematch with Pantoja, imagine that. A fight where Pantoja gets tired just as he has in their 2 previous fights, but doesn't actually get the range to connect on any takedowns because Royval just stays far away and leaf blowers 5 inches away from his nose. That sounds awful. The second one, you're right. It wasn't terrible, but it had zero drama. If he were to take this approach and it had a similar effect in a third fight, that would genuinely be awful. I don't want to see that.
I'm just sort of not interested in what I'm going to see from Brandon Royval at some point because he hasn't developed in any meaningful, technical way. He's just developed in a way which sucks some of the fight out of the fight.
Yep. I say you make Brandon Royval versus Amir Albazi.
Yeah.
Give Albazi a chance to save us from another flyweight trilogy matchup, one that I have far less interest in seeing than the last one. Than the last 2. Okay. Well, let's take a break there. We'll call it. When we come back, I dearly would like to talk about Brian Ortega versus Yair Rodriguez before we even touch the Rosenstruik Gaziev card. So that's what we're going to do. When we return, Ortega Rodriguez. After that, the shit that the Sauds didn't want. After this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Once more, we continue through the UFC Mexico City Fight Night card. As I said at the end of last segment, or maybe I said this between segments, I don't know. There was a weird sort of bargain struck where the UFC put these 2 little guy fights at the top of the card, a rare blessing. And in exchange, it appears they extracted from those little guys a promise that they would try to replicate the feeling that you usually get from a fight night main event or co-main event. The flyweights fought like middleweights, and I'll be damned if this featherweight fight here was not, in fact, a light heavyweight fight.
Yep.
Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, really looked like a classic type of light heavyweight fight, in fact. The guy who grapples, one of the most enduring stylistic archetypes at light heavyweight, that's just like the submission hunter is a type that doesn't really exist in most other divisions. But damn it, Brian Ortega is perhaps, and always has been, the premier submission hunter in the entire sport. He is basically like a Yoel Romero who only knows how to finish fights with grappling. He is a master of losing rounds, but a master of getting very impressive wins in singular moments. And I think it's pretty clear he's getting a little old. He's probably feeling the wear and tear from some heinously difficult fights. All those lost rounds were not easy. But he is essentially still the guy who, if you let him just sort of wedge his way in, he will crush you. And that's what he did here.
Yeah, I don't like Brian Ortega. Something about him just kind of rubs me the wrong way. I mean, it's partially, big douchey things he's done, like attacking Korean zombies, like Translator or whatever it was.
Did he? What was that? I don't remember that.
Being sarcastic, I hope so.
No, he got into a fight with him backstage, didn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, that's ringing a bell now.
Yeah, just generally douchey stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
Also, just the fact that he's only beaten, he had a sort of run of having wins which have aged pretty poorly, partially because the people in them have just aged, and has hung on to a completely inexplicable top 5 ranking for no reason for absolutely years.
Yeah, it's really easy to resent him for having this undeserved spot. And all this inertia.
Yeah. All that being said, I had to give him a lot of credit for this one.
Mm-hmm.
Because this wasn't just a, survive and win classic Brian Ortega. At least that's not what I thought. Even when I was watching, the early goings of this fight, I found myself thinking, which was, mostly him getting smoked. I found myself mostly thinking, this is the best way for you to approach this with your skill set, Brian Ortega.
Yeah, I'm full credit to him for being...
He did exactly what...
Go on.
Yeah. He did exactly what, say, Josh Emmett didn't, which is to do his absolute best to not give Yair Rodriguez a scrap of range, even if it cost him damage. And it practically got him finished.
Yeah.
On, I think, maybe more than one occasion in the first round.
Yeah.
But he'd set himself that he was going to keep throwing after he threw. He was going to chase Yair out of the pocket every single time. And when he got inside, he was going to try and actually wrestle.
Yeah. He was, in fact, insanely aggressive in this fight. And
this one did...
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so, I mean... we talked a little bit about the differences between, how just pure variance can change MMA outcomes, but also that, obviously Royval and Moreno had altered their approaches based on their experiences last time. But that still felt like a kind of MMA variance outcome, especially because it didn't feel that likely that Royval could actually win that fight. But this genuinely felt like someone coming in with a game plan which maximized their chances to win a fight.
Yeah. 100%.
I don't know that it would work that many times, but it would certainly work more than I would credit him with. And yeah, I have to credit Brian Ortega because that's not the first time that he's... I mean, because the Korean zombie fight was largely a sort of back foot counterpunching performance. It's not the first time that he's come in with a very specific game plan, which has worked really well.
Yeah. These game plans are often sort of rendered in very broad strokes, but you can't fault them for being bad ideas fundamentally. What do you do against Yair Rodriguez, especially in the first fight? The main thing that jumped out at us last week is that, Yair is 3 times faster than Brian Ortega, who has just notably bad striking defense. And he was really just kind of tuning Ortega up, even off the back foot, just hitting him at will. And then Ortega had to go to the wrestling. This time he was like, well, if you're going to hit me at will off the back foot, I may as well just run at you. Now tell me, Phil, you haven't mentioned it, so I have to make sure you are aware of what happened before this fight actually started, right?
Oh, the hop.
Brian Ortega, who last time we were saying it was an unsatisfying end to the first fight, but at the very least you could argue, well, Yair Rodriguez is responsible for injuring him. This time, Brian Ortega made it to the cage and appeared to snap his ankle in two while his name was being announced by Bruce Buffer. He was jumping up and down.
Yeah.
That weird thing that MMA fighters love to do because they've seen other fighters do it. Something you don't see in any other sport, but is essentially like the MMA fighter's version of like the sumo stomp. And he rolled his goddamn ankle and was like visibly panicked.
Leave that shit to the professionals, Brian.
That's right.
You're no Betch Kohea.
That's right.
Like, leave it to the athletes.
He rolled his ankle and like you could see it on his face. I don't fault him. He was freaking out, as anybody would be. Like the fight's about to start. He's going to have to go through with it now. And he just injured himself. And I think that was in fact responsible for the first knockdown. He got hit and then his weight got thrown back. It was his right ankle, his back leg, and it just didn't support him when he got hit, and he just went down. Like his leg just wasn't there, I think because of the ankle injury. So in addition to the fundamental difficulties of the matchup, he fucking wounded himself before the fight even started, right before the fight started. So yeah, for me, like I can't help but give Brian Ortega huge props for this performance. We knew he was gutsy and tough and determined, based on so many fights before, but this was just another reminder of how uniquely tough and committed he is to just hanging around in fights until he's able to find some way to win them. And to be honest, this was maybe one of the best round-winning sort of game plans Ortega has ever hit upon, other than, I guess, that Korean zombie fight. Because even if it was like sacrificial in a way, and the game plan nearly cost him dearly in the first round, once the momentum shifted, it was like all Brian Ortega.
Yep.
Injury and all.
Yeah, I mean, this was what we're preaching a lot of the time, which is, risk mitigation through risk acceptance.
Exactly. Yeah, calculated risk.
If he just hung out at range, he might have gotten smoked less badly in the first round.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have won.
He would have gotten smoked for the entirety of the fight.
Yep.
He would have ended up like poor Josh Emmett.
Yep. Yeah. Credit to Ortega for being super, super aggressive. Also credit to him for his wrestling approach. I think he understood perhaps more than we did. Because we were talking about, Yair just having unbelievable cardio, which he does usually.
Yes.
And this now fits into what was not a very clear pattern to me. And I don't think that I have a good excuse for that. But now having seen it 3 times, it's pretty clear that Yair has unbelievable cardio as long as you let him do nothing but really stupid striking. He can throw...
I think that's not quite... Because there's one fight which obviously gives the lie to this, I think.
Yeah.
And it's the Holloway fight. Holloway took him down a bunch.
He did deal with a lot of wrestling.
Yeah, I think it's that... I think it's the combination. It's like it just like unlocks his like the valve to his gas tank, if you will. It's like it's that if he is doing really well, and then someone starts grappling with him, I think it's the combination of those two things. Is that it's the coming down from the high of beating someone's ass, and then them starting to grapple with him.
It's the adrenaline dump, perhaps, of the momentum swing.
Yeah, because the Holloway fight again, like he was really, he did amazingly well. That's why I sort of went away from that narrative, because I was shocked at how much he had been able to sustain over that fight, even if he didn't win it.
Yeah, did Holloway really effectively control him on the ground at any point? You have to remind me.
Yeah, he did have a few, like some serious positions of top control, and he obviously, pressured him about as much as Ortega did.
Yeah.
Rodriguez just didn't disintegrate in the same way.
That's true. I mean, the other 2 fights, that also don't fit into the alternative pattern you've just suggested. One of them does, the Jeremy Stevens rematch, where he was doing quite well. And then he got taken down and obviously gassed and just lost.
He beat the shit out of Jeremy Stevens, didn't he?
Yeah, but he just lost at the very end of the fight very clearly because he just got taken down. And he couldn't.
I mean, that's what I mean, is that he was absolutely smoking him.
Yeah. And it was the turn. The Frankie Edgar fight, however, he was losing the whole time by being out-grappled, and he gassed in that one too.
Mm-hmm.
But it is just weird. Like, the Holloway fight is another wrinkle that makes it difficult to wrap your head around because, otherwise he can go, like, I know it's been scrubbed from the internet for some reason, but that 25-minute fight with Alex Caceres, was that not
absolutely absurd
in either Mexico City or Denver? It was somewhere.
It was definitely at altitude, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was Mexico City.
Yeah. Yeah, it was either that or Denver or Salt Lake or something. I think it was Mexico City. And that fight is absurd. Like, he's just doing nothing but wasting energy for 25 minutes. It's like he spins around like 700 times in that fight. And he didn't slow down at all. We were all marveling at it at the time. But then you have a fight like this where he crushes Ortega in the first round, and then he gets taken down at the end of that. And even there, within the first round, you can already see there is like some panic gassing setting in, where he's just like starting to try to rush his way out of positions. And next time he gets taken down, even before the next takedown, he's just not as effective. He's clearly like, he looks withered. He looks a bit broken. I don't know. I've seen this guy be so inefficient for so long that I was like, oh, he's got Max Holloway cardio.
Yeah.
But then sometimes he just doesn't.
Yep. Sometimes something just, it's clearly a mental thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It just has to be.
Something causes him to just tense up and then his inefficient technique actually becomes a real problem where he just can't do anything that doesn't just dump his shrinking reserves of energy.
Yeah.
But
and obviously it becomes like this fight was once again like an indication of how flawed Yair Rodriguez is as a fighter.
Yes.
Because it was just about Ortega breaking through that first layer. And then Rodriguez just has the, flurry of counterpunches that he's always... I hesitate to call them the counterpunches. He just spams hooks until the other person goes away. If they're really pressuring him like he always has. And if he doesn't, it's just trying to run for it, basically, to get back to range where he can go back to kicking the shit out of them.
Yeah. You're right, by the way. Like, there are several moments in that Holloway fight where Holloway is like stacking his guard or like sitting in half guard and pummeling him from top position.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just the sort of fleeting takedowns with no control that I remember.
Yeah.
So
he had some serious top time on him. And I was just like, oh, maybe he's fixed it.
Just that fight is now a bizarre outlier because it defies the pattern that seems to be set by the other three like grappling losses. I don't know, man. It has to be mental, and maybe the mental triggers that cause that response just are not that obvious to us as people who are not inside Yair Rodriguez's head.
Yep.
But yeah, I want to give a little more credit to Ortega. Not only was this was the very broad strokes element of the game plan, just the relentless pressure that started immediately. A great idea. As risky as it was, a very, very well-chosen risk to accept. But I also want to give credit to Ortega for his wrestling, which has so often been the missing piece from his game. Like just this week, there was
not only just him, but the archetype that he occupies.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
the BJJ ace who decides, no one can go to the ground with me because I'm a BJJ ace.
Yeah.
So I'm simply going to become the best striker in the world.
Again, you want to talk about the light heavyweight versions of this. You got Paul Craig, you got Magomed Ankalaev. There's always at least one of these dudes kicking around at 205.
Yeah, I mean, at lower weight, there's Luke Rockhold. There's,
sure.
to
Chase
some extent,
Hooper.
there's the Diaz brothers.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's a classic MMA archetype. But his wrestling was on point for this card. He, in fact, used the exact same takedowns that Volkanovski used really successfully against Yair. Didn't go for double legs or single legs. He went to the body lock and combined inside and outside trips, which Volkanovski made just look stupidly easy against Yair, and likewise in this fight. Ortega just very effortlessly. I mean, really nice, smooth wrestling. I would like to see more fighters do more of that. It's such a huge part of the takedown games of both Khabib and Islam. Those little switching between the outside, getting the fighter to sort of widen his stance, and then the quick little inside trip, which is so light it's practically a foot sweep. Just drag his foot out from under him and fall on top of him. That was Ortega's move in this fight, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah, and again, it just speaks of like preparation and tape study.
Yeah, and his approach to the ground too. Like Ortega is so often a sort of anti-positional submission hunter. He just sat in Yair's guard and hit him with elbows. And that is how all the people who have managed to gas Yair on the ground and beat him up there, that's how they've all done it. Frankie and Jeremy Stevens both did that to great effect. Ortega and his team.
I did also hear that maybe it was Jack Slack that said this, that like Yair just has like a really old school defensive BJJ game, which means that he is incredibly vulnerable to just getting beaten up by the fence.
For sure.
Because he cannot throw his guard up, and he cannot, he just keeps getting crushed into the fence. He's never like wall walking, trying to get back to his feet that way.
For sure. You can see that in a lot of his fights.
Factor in. Yeah.
Have a weirdly outdated defensive guard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, this basically, like, this fight did more to win me over to Brian Ortega than any other fight I've ever seen his, even though I've so often seen his toughness on full display. This was a fight where his toughness was combined with some really excellent decision making and preparation, and I got to give him props for that.
Yeah, I think he should get a title shot.
He went so quickly from guy who hasn't deserved to be in the top 5 for the last 4 years to, hey, this dude should fight Ilya.
You know why? Because
Ilya would beat him, you think?
Well, there's that. But also, because Volkanovski shouldn't be fighting Topuria anytime soon.
No, though he's probably going to.
Holloway is off getting chunks torn out of him by Gaethje. We know Dana is not going to give a title shot to Movsar Evloev.
Of course.
And Brian Ortega is it. And basically he fits the exact... Whilst I don't think he in any way deserves a title shot on the merits, he is exactly the kind of line him up, knock him down kind of title defense that I would just like to see Topuria getting at the moment.
Yeah.
I would like to see Topuria be busy. I'd like him to get like opponents that people want to see that will test, if not beat him in multiple areas. And like, I just want to see him fight people. And frankly, Ortega is the only opportunity that they have, I think, to get a relatively not short notice, but he's the only person who I think is likely to get a title shot anytime soon. Who I think, who can be put in there. Evloev would be better, but they're not going to do that.
They're not going to do it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'll be happy to see it, honestly. I mean, say what you will about Brian Ortega. Pretty much always a fun fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never boring. It's never a letdown. Even his most boring fight was an unexpected dismantling of Korean Zombie, and it wasn't really boring. He just it's just not him getting his ass kicked most of the time. But usually that's what you get Ortega getting his ass kicked until he possibly just suddenly wins. You know what I think I really don't like about Brian Ortega?
You handsome?
I think it's actually the opposite of that. I think it's the pigtails.
Yeah, it might be.
I think that's the main thing. He just has stupid hair when he fights. It looks great when it's loose. He should just stop doing the whole cornrows and pigtails thing. I hate that.
You tell him, Connor.
That's right. As another guy in his white man in his 30s who now has really stupid long hair, I feel qualified to say don't do pigtails. It looks dumb.
Maybe you two should just swap hairstyles for a while and see how you enjoy the experience.
Me with cornrows, pigtails.
Maybe you'll come over to his side. Yeah.
That would be awesome. My girlfriend would love that.
I know.
Okay. Well, I think that will be it for our discussion of the Mexico City card. Let's now turn to, first a segment break, and when we return, we will go to Saudi Arabia. Oh, wait. No, I've just been handed a note. It's Rosenstruck, Gaziev, and the rest in Vegas at, guess where? The Apex. After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
We should say at the top of this segment, Phil, that it's just not easy to get access to the PFL card that happened last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Going forward, we're going to have to find a way to, because God knows, like, you just can't expect me to watch all these things live. I'm sorry, folks. I just, for Phil, that means, like, staying up until 5 a.m. or waking up at 4 a.m. That's rude. You can't expect him to do that. And for me, it means, making me watch it. I just would rather, do that either.
It means sitting through the ad breaks.
Yeah, I'd just rather do that late at night or, on Sunday afternoon. But,
I will say I tried looking up these fights as one does, on YouTube, to see if someone had uploaded any sneaky copies of it. And someone had uploaded like an Impa Kasanganai against what's his face things. They said, full fight highlights, replays, whatever. And looked it up, and it was literally just. And when I hovered over it, I could see people fighting in the clip and so on. And I hovered over it, and it was literally just someone playing the UFC game.
That is a very common tactic to get paid for views. Very, very common that people just put a deceptive picture of the real fighters in the thumbnail, and then it's just them playing like a. But like, is there a video game that includes Johnny Eblen?
No. And that's the thing. I didn't actually look closely enough to see if these people had made custom, because I would have respected it. Given them my views, if they'd made custom fighters, which resembled
there might be an
Kasanganai and Johnny Eblen.
There might be an Impa Kasanganai because he was in the UFC briefly, but Johnny Eblen. Well, I don't know. I mean, he was on the receiving end of most famous UFC KO ever, so he might have been in there.
What was his special move be? Getting 360 wheel kicked?
Yeah. Yeah, what do you mean would his special move be? They put fucking Muhammad Ali in the game and gave him Nate Diaz's animations. You think they care that each fighter has to have special moves? They don't give a fuck. They're like famously the laziest video game company on the planet, EA. So, yeah.
They also put Dana White and Mask in the UFC games. So, you know.
Dana White, who's just ripped and really good at fighting and isn't constantly like pausing the action to like stick a finger in his ear and rub it around because of his tinnitus. Oh, hold on. Stop. Pause. We gotta. Anyway, the PFL card happened. The funny story out of it really was that it was billed as PFL versus Bellator, which is in itself kind of funny now that Bellator is officially defunct. All of these fighters are Bellator fighters, but like it was pretty clearly they had the idea that this would be like a sort of transfer of power. Be like, look, our PFL fighters are taking over the divisions once quote unquote ruled by these Bellator champions, and they just all lost. The Bellator guys won every fight except the main event, in which it was Ryan Bader versus Big Man Who Punch Hard, and we all know exactly how that matchup goes anyway. So at least Ryan Bader did his part.
This is in like modern promotional history. In fact, all of now I'm thinking about it. This has happened at least once every time. Like, for example, the UFC has bought up one of its competitors.
True, they got WEC and Pride.
Like, yeah. So there was, I mean, in order, it was Strikeforce, where Luke Rockhold came along and immediately took pretty much immediately, not quite. He lost Esau, took the middleweight belt. There was WEC, where Benson Henderson and then Anthony Pettis became champion. And yeah, Pride, when Rampage
came over.
Light heavyweight champion.
Yep. Came over and fucked Chuck. Wait, no, that was a different guy. Yeah, not the first time. Did it happen with any WEC fighters? I guess. Oh, you already said Anthony Pettis, right?
Yeah. And Bando.
They just the UFC was. I mean, in some way, it is a long-term good sign for PFL because it means they've now got all these guys who clearly deserve to be the champions in their respective divisions. But,
yeah, exactly, because it's just like no one really thinks apart from us old nerds as Bendo or or Pettis or Cerrone, God forbid, as WEC fighters.
Right, they are UFC staples.
Yep.
Yeah, and now all of these guys are PFL fighters, so good to have them. I suppose there's just a slight degree more canniness on the part of the UFC's matchmaking masterminds in that they did not ever build an entire card in which
they called UFC versus WEC where every one of their fighters got smoked.
They just had their entire roster getting rinsed by the promotion that they had to buy out in order to beat in the marketplace. So that was maybe a slight misstep, but hey, who's to say down the road the PFL roster didn't just get incredibly stronger and now, perhaps almost rivals the UFC. Hey, like I said, clearly for as long as it lasts, as long as it's, the PFL is lucky that we're currently in like an age of, in such an age of, capitalist domination that like there is just gobs and gobs of like VC investor money flying around. Nothing seems to have any need to be profitable anymore. And so they're probably going to keep going a lot longer than a lot of the older promotions who like did the same shit. They blew all their money and then immediately folded. Now, apparently you can just show your private investors several years worth of profit losses and they're like, well, I still have too much money. So here, have some more. Who's to say, but going forward, we are going to have to keep a closer eye and I guess watch PFL events live if we want to talk about them. Anyway, let's talk about some stupid goddamn heavyweights. Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Shamil Gaziev. As we said at the top of the show, Rozenstruik's 6th main event booking. A disgusting sight.
This is a crime against God.
Yeah, it's certainly a crime against Allah, because otherwise this would be happening, as we said, in Saudi Arabia. And it's not. They didn't want it. This has the flavor of when they put Sean Strickland versus Abusupian Magomedov in a main event slot.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, okay, I know one of these guys, for whatever perverse reason, it's not surprising to me that you've booked him in a main event. Who the fuck is this opponent, though? Like, that's half the reason this looks like shit. To the UFC's credit, this time it is a heavyweight. And you can actually be, like, much worse, technically, than somebody like Abus Magomedov and still be a really credible heavyweight threat. And Shamil Gaziev does not look like he's not good enough to be a ranked UFC heavyweight. He looks more than good enough, in fact. He looks like Sergey Pavlovich, more or less.
Yeah. He's just like a reasonably big, accurate puncher.
Yeah, super aggressive, throws combinations, obviously hits like a truck, and has made one pitiably positive impression in that, in his lone UFC fight, which was against Martin Budai, a reasonable, unranked heavyweight type of guy, somebody who's very tough and can go 3 rounds. So that's enough to make you a gatekeeper in this division. He was tough enough that Gaziev was not able to crush him outright. He just battered him for an entire round. And after that, proved at the very least that he has 1 1/5 rounds worth of cardio, which I think I actually picked against him in that fight for exactly that reason. That this is your classic fighter who all first round finishes pretty much, and then there's one split decision hidden in there on his record. And I'm like, okay, I know what kind of fighter this is. He either crushes you early or he doesn't, and then the rest of the fight is sheer misery. And he probably is pretty much still that kind of fighter, but he did succeed in getting the finish outside the first round. Actually, not the very first time that's happened. He has finished several opponents right at the start of round 2. So he has at least that much cardio, and therefore at least that much time to beat Jairzinho Rozenstruik before this fight turns into the most miserable slog of the year so far.
Yeah, I don't know. He looks like someone. I mean, because so much of that Budai fight is just Budai being a heavy bag.
Exactly. He has nothing. He
is swiftly cowed into not throwing anything back, and I just find myself thinking this is just Gaziev's experience.
Yep.
Is that he's as I said, like quite a sharp, straight puncher for a heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know how much anyone's ever thrown back at him. Like whether he's ever encountered anyone who can like slip something and counterpunch him.
They pretty much all get cowed. Yeah.
Yeah, because he just doesn't look like there's obviously like no built-in defense to what he's doing or anything like that. That's not
even more so than insane. Pavlovich. That's what I was going to say too. He is so square. Cause he wants to cut off the cage. I guess credit to him for that, but he comes in so square and completely wide open, and he doesn't exactly like feint or jab his way into range. He kind of just walks in and then starts throwing. I have a strong feeling that Rozenstruik is going to be the first guy he has ever encountered who can actually like have his ass up against the fence and still throw hard punches.
Yeah, that is my feeling, is that like Rozenstruik is going to just immediately hurt him very badly.
Yeah. We hope. We hope.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, man. I just don't know what I want from this one.
Well, what I mean is we hope it's that kind of Rozenstruik. If this devolves into the other kind of Rozenstruik fight, we know how unhappy we'll feel watching that.
Yeah. I mean, the ideal, I guess, would be like just the Volkov fight, where someone with a big straight puncher without much defense just walks Rozenstruik up to the cage and then just sleeps him.
Yeah, it's happened more than once.
But yeah, I can't really pick this guy to beat Rosenstrike. Again, like Rosenstrike does give ground in the confidence that he can punch with power, and again, like things like the Volkov fight, that was a terrible idea because Volkov just predicted him slipping a jab and then just cracked him with a right hand.
Mm-hmm.
This guy could do that
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, he just doesn't look like anyone has ever tried punching back at him.
Yeah. I mean, he's like a slightly less sophisticated Pavlovich, but like having now seen enough of Pavlovich, would you like feel weird about picking him over Rosenstrike? No way. Mm-hmm. So easy to see him crushing Rosenstrike against the fence. That could very easily happen here. I'm just going to default to picking Rosenstrike for exactly the reasons you laid out.
Yep, you kind of have to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you could really just flip a coin, to be honest. It's a heavyweight fight. Mm-hmm. Like I said, you don't need to be really that good. If you're powerful and aggressive, and you've already got a ton of quick knockouts on your record, you can go shockingly far in the UFC's heavyweight division. I think it's really somewhat a matter of luck that otherwise Gaziv really does have what it takes. I've already seen enough. He's got what it takes to get to fringe contention right now if the chips just fall the right way. But I'm going to pick Rosenstrike anyway. Okay, let's skip the co-main. Vitor Petrino, Tyson Pedro. Petrino's going to win because Tyson Pedro has...
Tyson Pedro is really bad.
Tyson Pedro is really bad, particularly if he doesn't kill somebody immediately. He is a fighter who's really only marginally effective in the first round, and if he is in complete control the entire time, Vitor Petrino, not a man to be completely controlled. He's like a little shorter, old-school Thiago Santos. He's a maniac. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, he's going to win. Let's talk about the fight that really should be the main event, except for the fact that it's probably not going to happen. Alex Perez, Mohamed Makayev.
Oh.
Yeah?
I thought you were going to be like, I thought you were going to say Mohamed Makayev match now.
Yeah, I mean, really, we are expecting that we're probably getting Makayev versus one of the other two flyweights on this card, right?
Match now is known better than Steve Urseg is, so that's my guess for what we actually end up getting. But yeah.
True. Which would be a shame, because I'm looking forward to Schnell Urseg. That, to me, is like it's one of the better fights on the card, and I like that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of the flyweight fights on this one are actually genuinely pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, I mean, Perez is someone... I think he's just a well-made booking for Makayev, with the obvious caveat of the fact that, like, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It won't happen. But because his primary problem in fights is that he's a huge, physically overwhelming flyweight who just panics when someone bullies him.
Yep.
Because he can't see it happening.
Yep.
And Makayev is not a bully.
Correct. Yeah. Makayev,
just
in
like
fact,
a textionally functional, clean, wrestler submission grappler who fights in like a really oddly, what's the right word here? Just an oddly like offenseless style, especially for a flyweight.
Yeah. He's I almost wanted to compare him to like pre-modern Islam Makhachev, but honestly, even then I feel like Makhachev was a little more just potent.
Mm-hmm.
Makayev is, he has a style which would really benefit from having just a little bit more of like Alex Perez's physicality.
Mm-hmm.
He really doesn't have it. And I can't quite tell as of yet if it's the lack of overwhelming physicality that makes him so like reticent when he's in good positions. Cause he is like, the man is like the antithesis of ground and pound.
Yep.
It would make such a huge difference in, I think both how effective he was and also how interesting he would be to watch if he was just throwing in some strikes on the ground. So I can't tell if it's that he just doesn't care to do so, or if he has to, like, he feels he has to devote all of his physical resources to maintaining control, and that's why he doesn't let any strikes go even when he's on top of somebody. Because he was like this close to losing to Tim Elliott due to getting like elbowed in the top of the head, even though he was on top most of the fight.
Yep.
I don't know. So, I mean, I wish it were happening because it looks like a pretty interesting, clash of two flawed psychologies.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would probably pick Mokaev at this point, simply because Perez is a very dangerous offensive wrestler, but he's just seems a bit too clunky at this weight to be like a good defensive wrestler. Wasn't that what happened when he fought Figueiredo in one of the more forgotten title challenges? Is that like Figueiredo just swept him and took top position?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, Mokaev, if nothing else, is a very, very good grappler.
He's a very technically proficient grappler, yes.
Yeah. You know who he weirdly reminds me of? This is going to be a bit of a deep cut for no one's going to remember.
Let's see.
He kind of reminds me of Ryan LaFleur.
No, I get that. Ryan LaFleur, another forgotten but very technically proficient all-rounder. He doesn't have, honestly, he doesn't have LaFleur's boxing or kickboxing.
Yeah.
He's much worse than him on the feet, which is a shame. Another thing that could really, really balance out Perez's game is if he showed any comfort or any of the comfort or technical precision on the feet that he does on the ground. He just doesn't, he's just not good at striking. He like completely overcommits. He ducks his head down. He looks like he's panicking anytime he gets into striking range. And as such is super inaccurate and inefficient.
But on the other hand, he's also immensely powerful, and he has at least been trained to do stuff like calf kick people.
True, he's got that.
Which means that he can just set his physicality against most people and just simply overwhelm them in the striking. It's only, people like Joseph Benavidez who have really gone after him that have been able to smash him there.
Well, I'm talking about Mokaev.
Sorry, Mokaev, yeah.
Mokaev.
Oh, yeah.
Perez is totally confident and competent in the striking so long as he is in control. Yes. Mokaev's striking is panic mode, and he is not. Oh, no. He is not extremely powerful.
No. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Perez is a totally competent striker. Yes. As long as he feels that he has the initiative and he's bigger and stronger, he can in fact look like quite a good kickboxer. I still remember.
Yeah. I guess the other person that Mokaev reminds me of is like Makwan Amirkhani with a gas tank. Because on the feet, it's largely like, I remember when he first came to the UFC, people were like, oh, this guy's actually as athletic as he needs to be to make this style work.
Right.
And then he killed someone with like a flying knee.
Yeah.
He was like, well, maybe he is. But then in retrospect, I feel that is a bit like, it is a bit like an old Mr. Finland in that it's him doing wild, crazy stuff on the feet is not an indication that he's comfortable. It's an indication that he is not comfortable.
Certainly,
there.
Yes.
That he feels he has to throw left field things out there to get at people, and then once he's actually put into the striking for any protracted period of time, he does not look good at all.
Yeah. He throws a lot of what is effectively just like befuddling slop out there in order to get to a point where he can take somebody down. And I mean, you can see it in his transitions to takedowns too. Like, if he were not such a great positional grappler, like, for example, against Tim Elliott, he hit switches and swept him. A lot of his actual takedowns failed outright. Because he just changes levels by bending his knees into a squat and doesn't drive through. It's just he wants to get connected to your legs, and once he's there, then maybe he can make something happen. But twice in that fight, he just sat into Tim Elliott's front headlock and got a breast spit because Elliott couldn't resist the urge to knee him in the face when he was down.
Yep.
And I think on one of them he hit like a switch or like a peek out to reverse that front headlock position, and that is in fact how he ended up on top of Elliott. So
yep.
He just doesn't. I just feel like it could be Perez if this fight were happening, because
that's the thing. His success feels so fragile in every fight.
We know the limitations of technical proficiency when you're just not like physically up to snuff, and that is the vibe I get from Mikhaev, that it is only by being a really clever technical fighter that he gets out of a lot of the really bad positions that his lack of physicality puts him into.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think despite the fact that he's like not offensive, he doesn't like do damage when he's fighting, he's clearly obviously just like a super gritty guy as well.
Yeah.
We've kind of seen that from his fight where he got his arm broken.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I believe
that was
or was it? No, it was the knee bar that like really badly hurt him, right?
Yeah, you're right.
I think he just still like gritted through it and got the finish himself. He's incredibly mentally tough.
Yep.
But you just feel like that game plan cannot last for too long, and Perez is a good enough wrestler and a dangerous enough striker that it could be the point at which it stops. And
just a big, strong guy for the division, which Mikhaev really isn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Assuming this fight does happen, I am going to pick Mikhaev, largely because I know that like being tough enough to just weather the storm and continue pushing is a thing that can break Perez. To be fair, that has only happened so far against people who are at or above his level of physicality. Joe Benavidez, Davison Figueiredo, and Alexandre Pantoja, none of these guys are notably unathletic or unpowerful. That being said, Pantoja and Figueiredo both
they're all just notably ferocious fighters.
Absolutely,
they are scary.
For sure. Yeah. So, but that is combined with the fact that the Pantoja and Figueiredo losses back to back, those are Perez's last two fights and his only two fights since June of 2020. Because he is absolutely snake bitten, and it's just really hard to have any confidence in him after such an unbelievable string of cancellations and injuries and etc. Like, I'm just going to pick Mikhaev because he's active and young, and I have no idea. I can't expect Perez to look as good as he used to. Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, my pick is still that the fight isn't going to happen.
Yeah, of course.
But,
Yep.
You know what? I'm going to pick Perez if the fight happens. Why not?
Yeah, sure. I think Perez is at his best. He is exactly the kind of guy that I've been waiting for to embarrass Mikhaev. And
yeah. I mean, he's not gonna. He's huge. He doesn't need to close distance to get into wrestling exchanges. He is quite a good wrestler. And he can just low kick Mikhaev from miles away.
Exactly. He also just doesn't have to wrestle.
And Mikhaev doesn't have, as you said, he doesn't have the shot to counter it.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big, strong guy who doesn't seem like he has to wrestle if he doesn't want to, and that pretty much.
Yeah. So, to be clear, my pick is still that the fight isn't happening, and we're going to get Mikhaev Schnell, and that Mikhaev's going to out wrestle him because Schnell's a big, tall noodle.
Yep, who loves playing guard.
Yep.
Then again, Schnell's actually good from guard and dangerous and insanely aggressive in every position. Even he could beat Mikhaev.
Yeah, it would be cool.
He
just has to make a cut. It just has to not make the slip-ups that Tim Elliott made.
Yep. All right. Well, do we touch on these other two fights at all? We're kind of running out of time.
Which are these? Wait a minute. Let me pull it up.
Umar Nurmagomedov versus Beksat Almakhan and the aforementioned Matt Schnell versus Steve Erceg, which obviously is not happening because one of these guys is fighting Mikhailov.
I haven't looked at Backside Almacan, apart from the fact that I'm just sure that he's pretty good just from his record.
He is pretty good. Yeah, he's the...
It's going to be one of those fights that Nurmagomedov's going to get absolutely nothing for, and I'm really puzzled that they made it.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. Who was the last Kazakh guy that they signed? Azad Maksum. Some good MMA fighters coming out of Kazakhstan recently, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Begzat Almacan is of a similar make. He looks like a very solid athlete. Very like simple but stable MMA striking game. Looks pretty powerful. And like you, I have no idea why Umar Nurmagomedov is not being given a top 15 or top 10 bantamweight, other than that it seems like they all either just fought or they're already booked. Because otherwise, I'd much rather see Umar fight somebody like, I don't know, Pedro Munoz or...
Yeah. Any one of these dudes.
Yeah. Or Jonathan Martinez. Yeah. I'd much rather see that. He was so impressive in his last fight with Rony Barcelos and really has 4 very credible UFC wins under his belt. And for some reason, they're just giving him a talented newcomer.
Very dangerous nobody.
Exactly. Matt Schnell, Steve Erceg. Great fight. I hope it happens.
Banger.
By which I hope Perez Mikhailov happens, because I want to see both. I was super, super impressed with Steve Erceg, to be honest, which is funny because I've been super impressed with him in both of his fights, which is funny because before his debut, he didn't really look like much to me. Because he's like a big, noodly flyweight.
Yeah, this is going to be a real, like, nerd showdown.
It really is. Like, 2 guys who really look like they belong getting stuffed in a locker. But both of whom are, like, actually pretty savage. They're, like, fully exacting revenge, vicariously on the world that did stuff them into lockers in high school. Matt Schnell, just like a nerd with a madman brawler's heart, to his own detriment, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Just gets into completely insane fights where the fact that he simply does not have a good chin and simply does not make good defensive adjustments at all. He just goes full tilt, full send looking for the KO on the feet. That tends to cost him. And then Steve Erceg, just a really, like, consummately well put together fighter, to be honest. Like, has a really sensible range boxing game, excellent jab, puts together nice, short, neat combinations off of that jab, works the body, seems to know how to pressure and cut off the cage. And then in his last fight against Alessandro Costa, we saw some quality wrestling and clinch fighting tacked onto that pressuring boxing game. I've been super impressed with him. I really like he's just a very clean fighter to watch. My intuition is that he's going to win because Matt Schnell is awesome and a lot of fun, but pretty much if he fights a good fighter, he tends to lose because he just destroys himself.
Yeah. I don't know, it's a tough one. Because Erceg hasn't really fought anyone. Like, he just hasn't fought anyone of the level of the people who have beaten Matt Schnell, essentially.
No, he hasn't.
And it is one of those things where, like, this is a weird mirror match for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these 2 guys are very similar. Like, they're both big, tall flyweights, very accurate, like, accurate punches, like, pretty good on the ground. Schnell's probably a little better there. The main X factor is obviously Matt Schnell's chin.
Yeah.
Is that And that's not like necessarily one of those things which I find, I'm not necessarily saying it's damning because we haven't really seen that Urseg's chin is either good or bad.
True.
But we know that Matt Schnell's chin is not good.
Yes. And the fact that Matt Schnell insists on demonstrating the poor quality of his chin by being completely insane, and reckless in exchanges. I would say that I think Urseg is a considerably better boxer than Matt Schnell just because he's really controlled and thoughtful. I mean, the way he uses his jab, varying the rhythm, mixing in feints, using it as both a feeler and a pry to sort of open up his opponent's stance and set up his follow-up shots. He's just much more difficult to like get the timing of. It's not obvious when he's just going to be poking you with it and when he's going to be barreling in. And he doesn't tend to overthrow or hang around in exchanges way too long, both of which are huge problems for Matt Schnell. He just sees red and goes nuts. And I think that comes through in Urseg's ground game as well. I like you say he's a better grappler than Schnell's a better grappler than Urseg. I think he's a more dangerous grappler than Urseg. But also, what's that?
Hence the name. Matt Danger Schnell.
Oh, Danger.
That's his name,
right?
Right?
Yeah, I don't know why you expected me to just know Matt Schnell's nickname off the top of my head.
Because it's a very silly nickname.
Yeah, and apt. It is apt.
Yeah, I like it.
But Urseg is just way more like positionally considered. You know, like if he feels himself being tipped off a top position, he'll just let it go and go back to the feet. This is something Matt Schnell does not do. Matt Schnell is commitment. He commits to every offensive idea he has and very often pays for it. So,
yeah, you're probably right.
I'm taking Urseg.
I do find myself thinking like it might be one of those ones where it's like, take the OG in this kind of style matchup. But mostly, I guess it's so much of Schnell's success in fights seems to be how much people react to his feints.
Yeah,
he's a very feinty fighter.
Mm-hmm.
He's got that weird, particularly like that kind of jaw feint where he like sort of looks off to one side, and, like jerks his chin.
Here's
like
my chin.
Throw. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like, but yeah, so much of his like boxing game is built around getting people to react to his feints and then working from there. And people who have either ignored that because they don't care, like Rogerio Bontorin, or like people who have just not been reacting to it because they are dictating the fight from the outside, and most obviously is like the disastrous fight against Rob Font.
Yeah.
Someone who's just jabbing him from the outside with more power and accuracy.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how Matt Schnell's feinting. Have been really bad for him. So yeah, I guess I'll probably have to pick Urseg as well. Yeah. But yeah, I think it could be a really competitive one. If he can if Schnell can draw reactions out of Urseg, if he can wrestle him. Yeah.
I expect Matt Schnell is mad enough to make it competitive and close as long as it lasts. And I think I would probably feel better about his chances if I hadn't already seen Urseg beat David Dvorak, who, because my suspicion would probably be that Urseg is probably so used to having a huge reach and height advantage that I have no reason to think he's not going to be immediately uncomfortable against somebody with a similarly long frame. But Dvorak is another lanky flyweight, and yeah. But yeah, I mean, Matt Schnell's crazy, and he will also mix up his strikes with his wrestling. That's something that can really throw off the kind of smooth rhythm of Urseg's classy, simplistic boxing game, which sort of happened in round 2 of the fight with Costa as well. Costa started threatening takedowns and launching overhands off of that, and Urseg really had to adjust and got put on the back foot for a good portion, a good bit of the middle portion of that fight. So I really like the matchup. I hope that Perez Mokaev holds together, not just because I want to see that fight, but because I also do not want to see them rob Peter to pay Paul and destroy this matchup, which I really like.
agreed.
All right. Well, that will do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We thank you all so much for listening and joining us once again. We'll be back next week to talk about, we might touch on this in a bonus. I don't think we're going to have a lot of time on the main show because unless there's a week off that I'm forgetting. No, UFC 299 is a mere 1 week after the Rosenstrike Gaziev card. That means Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera 2, Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis, Kevin Holland versus Michael Page. That will be fun to talk about at the very least. Gilbert Burns, Jack Della Maddalena, Piotr Jan, Song Yadong. Curtis Blades, Jailton Almeida.
Banger lineup.
Curtis Blades, Jailton Almeida. That's the Almeida fight I've been hoping to see.
It's the one fight that means anything.
That's right.
Jailton Almeida.
Pedro Munoz, Kyler Phillips. Really, the whole card is phenomenal. So we are going to have a great time previewing that one for you next week, and we might have to squeeze a bonus episode out just to cover everything on UFC 299. Fuck Rosenstrike Gaziev. I'm sympathizing with the Sauds more and more. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, until then, find us on Twitter, @BoxingBush. That's me. @Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil. And check us out on the Patreon. We love you. We appreciate your support. And we'll talk to you next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.